Before you listen to the rest of this, I want you to do something most parents almost never do. I want you to remember one small moment that did not look dramatic at all. Maybe your child was telling you something, then suddenly changed the subject. Maybe they laughed when they were obviously hurt. Maybe they shrugged and said, "It's fine," in a voice that sounded nothing like fine. Hold that moment in your mind, because before this video ends, there's a very good chance you will understand something most parents miss for years. The problem was not only what your child said. The real problem was what your child expected to feel if they kept going. And once you understand that, you stop hearing your child as difficult, dramatic, disrespectful, or closed off. You start hearing them as someone who may be protecting themselves in a place that is supposed to feel safe. That is one of the most painful truths in family life. Children can be deeply loved and still feel emotionally alone. Not because their parents do not care, but because care and emotional safety are not always the same thing. A parent can love hard, worry hard, try hard, protect hard, guide hard, and still accidentally create an atmosphere where the child learns one quiet lesson. Some parts of me are safer to keep to myself. That is where emotional distance begins, not with one giant betrayal, not with some dramatic movie scene, but with patterns. A parent thinks, "I'm helping." A child feels, "I'm being corrected." A parent thinks, "I'm guiding." A child feels, "I'm being controlled." A parent thinks, "I'm staying involved." A child feels, "I'm being watched." A parent thinks, "I'm showing concern." A child feels, "I am becoming a problem." And when that gap repeats often enough, children stop bringing the raw version of themselves into the room. They bring the safe version, the quick version, the edited version, the version that creates the least emotional fallout. That is not trust. That is adaptation. And one of the most dangerous things about this pattern is how normal it looks from the outside. The child is still in the house, still answering questions, still eating dinner, still going to school, still saying yes, no, maybe, later, I forgot, nothing happened. But something real has changed. You are no longer in direct contact with their inner world. You are in contact with a version they think your nervous system can handle. The first habit that makes kids feel alone is solving before sensing. This happens every day in good homes. A child says school was awful. The parent starts troubleshooting. A teen says they feel left out. The parent gives strategy. A child says they are scared. The parent starts reassuring, explaining, correcting, motivating. The parent thinks, "I am helping my child move forward." The child feels, "I am alone inside this feeling." Because when a child brings you pain, what they need first is not always a solution. Sometimes they need proof that their internal reality can land somewhere without being immediately improved. That sounds like a small difference. It is not. It is the difference between feeling guided and feeling emotionally bypassed. When a child says, "I had a horrible day," and the parent immediately says, "Maybe you just need better time management," or "Maybe your friend didn't mean it like that," or "Next time you should just ignore it," the child learns something very fast. My feeling is already being moved away from before it has even been fully seen. And over time, that creates loneliness. Because loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of being deeply understood by the people who are right next to you. The second habit is emotional overreading. This is when parents react not only to what is happening, but to everything they fear it might mean. A child comes home quiet. The parent sees a crisis. A teen wants to be alone for an evening. The parent feels rejected. A child says they do not want to talk. The parent starts hearing secrets, danger, bad influence, emotional collapse, or the beginning of permanent distance. Now the child is not only dealing with whatever they were already feeling, they are also dealing with the parent's interpretation of it, and that can feel exhausting, especially for teenagers. Teens are already trying to understand themselves while living inside an intense storm of social awareness, identity shifts, emotional sensitivity, exhaustion, and the impossible pressure of looking normal while not feeling normal at all. So when a parent turns every silence into a mystery, every mood into a threat, and every change into a warning sign, the teen often begins to hide just to avoid being psychologically turned into a full investigation. That is one reason some teens stop sharing early. Not because they do not need their parents, because they do not want every normal fluctuation of being a teenager to become an emotional weather report with commentary. The third habit is making children feel emotionally responsible for the room. This one runs deep. A child tells the truth. The atmosphere changes. Your face tightens. Your tone gets sharper. Dinner gets quieter. The whole energy of the house shifts. You may not even say anything cruel, but children are unbelievably sensitive to emotional consequence. And when they realize that honesty changes the whole room, they start making calculations. Can I tell this without ruining the night? Can I say this without stressing my parent? Can I admit this without creating a mood? Can I be honest without becoming the emotional center of the family for the next 3 hours? And when the answer keeps feeling like no, children adapt. They stop bringing the whole truth, not because they enjoy hiding, because they are trying to avoid emotional labor. That is the hidden tragedy. A child starts protecting the parent from the full truth, and the parent mistakes that for distance, attitude, or dishonesty. But often the child is simply trying not to trigger a reaction that feels too big for the size of the moment. This is how emotional loneliness grows inside loving homes. The fourth habit is constant micro-correction. This one looks harmless. It even looks helpful. Your child tells a story. You correct a detail. They explain an idea. You improve the wording. They try something new. You point out how to do it better. They help in the kitchen. You adjust everything. They speak excitedly. You interrupt with accuracy. And none of this seems major in isolation. That is why it is so easy to miss. But when a child experiences constant correction, they start absorbing a very specific message. My first version is rarely good enough. My natural way of doing things is usually about to be fixed. Being with my parent means being slightly edited all the time. Now imagine what that does to emotional openness. A child who already expects correction in small things is not likely to bring you raw, unfinished feelings. Because feelings are even messier than facts. If their story gets corrected, why would they trust that their pain will not get corrected too? So now the child becomes more polished, more careful, more concise, less experimental, less expressive. Again, it may look like maturity, but many times it is just self-protection. The fifth habit is rushing children out of discomfort because we cannot tolerate it ourselves. A child cries. We want the crying over. A teen feels embarrassed. We want to reframe it in 30 seconds. A child says they are anxious. We want to reassure it away. A teen says they feel ugly, awkward, excluded, weird, or behind. We want to replace that feeling with a healthier thought before the sentence is even finished. And this comes from love. But children often experience it as pressure. Not pressure to behave, pressure to feel differently on our timeline. The hidden message becomes this: please stop being in this uncomfortable place, because I do not know how to stay here with you. That message creates isolation. Because children do not just need help getting out of feelings. They need adults who can help them survive feelings without making those feelings feel unacceptable. That is what emotional safety actually is. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of a steady person who does not panic at the sight of your pain. And when children do not experience that, they start carrying more of their inner world alone. Not because they are stronger, because it feels easier than being rushed, reframed, improved, and emotionally tidied up before they are ready. The sixth habit is confusing monitoring with relationship. Many parents know a lot about what their child does, where they are, what grades they got, who they text, what app they use, what assignment is late, what practice starts at 6, what time they came home. But knowledge is not the same as connection. A child can be fully supervised and still feel deeply unknown. Because children do not only need structure, they need resonance. They need someone who can notice that their bad attitude may be shame, that their silence may be overload, that their messy room may not be laziness, but exhaustion, sadness, or internal chaos. That their refusal may not be rebellion, but the only way they know how to reclaim a little control. And yes, boundaries matter. Rules matter. Consequences matter. Parental leadership matters. But when children feel managed without feeling known, they often comply on the outside while pulling away on the inside. That is the beginning of emotional isolation. A child starts feeling like a project instead of a person. The seventh habit is treating independence like rejection. This one shows up strongly with older children and teens. They close the door. We feel shut out. They want privacy. We feel distrusted. They spend more time with friends. We feel replaced. They stop narrating every thought. We feel like the relationship is slipping. But development naturally includes separation. A healthy child becomes more independent, more private, more internally self-directed. That is not evidence of failure. That is growth. The problem begins when parents cannot tolerate that growth without turning it into emotional pursuit. Now every silence gets chased. Every mood gets questioned. Every distance gets personalized. Every private moment gets treated like a problem to solve. And emotional chasing almost always backfires. Because the child does not feel loved by it. They feel crowded by it. Then they pull back more. The parent panics more. The child hides more. The parent presses more. And both people end up feeling abandoned by the other. The eighth habit is making mistakes feel identity-threatening. A child forgets something. Now they are careless. A teen lies once. Now they are deceptive. A child gets defensive. Now they are disrespectful. A teen shuts down. Now they are impossible. This is where many parents unintentionally damage trust the fastest. Because children can handle being corrected. What they struggle with is feeling that one bad moment becomes a statement about who they are. Once that happens, honesty gets much harder. Because now the child is not only afraid of a consequence, they are afraid of becoming the disappointing version of themselves in your eyes. And when identity feels under threat, the nervous system protects. That protection may sound like denial, or sarcasm, or emotional flatness, or bad lying, or whatever. Or, leave me alone. Parents hear attitude, but often the child is trying not to collapse under shame. The ninth habit is forgetting that relationship is built more by patterns than by intentions. This may be the deepest one of all. Parents often think, but I love my child more than anything. And that is true. But children do not live inside our intentions. They live inside our repeated emotional patterns. If the repeated pattern is pressure, they feel pressure. If the repeated pattern is correction, they feel correction. If the repeated pattern is emotional unpredictability, they feel instability. If the repeated pattern is being rushed, read, fixed, and evaluated, that is what the relationship feels like from the inside. Love can exist there, but safety may not. And children do not open deeply where safety is inconsistent. That is why parents can be genuinely loving and still hear very little of their child's real world. The child is not rejecting the love. They are protecting themselves from the pattern around the love. If this is hitting close to home, leave a comment with one real-life moment when you were honestly trying to help your child, but later realized your reaction may have made them feel more alone instead of more understood. Just one real example. Because a lot of parents live this pattern quietly and think they are the only ones. Now here is the good news. Children are incredibly sensitive to negative patterns, but they are also incredibly sensitive to repair. If your tone changes, they notice. If your timing gets better, they notice. If your face becomes safer, they notice. If your curiosity becomes less loaded, they notice. If you start protecting their dignity even during hard conversations, they notice. And that is where the whole relationship can begin to shift, not because you become perfect, but because your presence becomes easier to stay real around. And this is where many parents finally face the hardest truth of all. Their child is not only reacting to what happens in this conversation. Their child is reacting to what the pattern has trained them to expect. If the pattern has taught them that honesty creates tension, they brace. If the pattern has taught them that mistakes become identity, they defend. If the pattern has taught them that sadness gets fixed too fast, they stop showing it. If the pattern has taught them that the parent's feelings become the biggest event in the room, they start protecting the parent from reality. And the heartbreaking part is that none of this requires bad intentions. It can happen in loving homes, stable homes, homes with sacrifice, effort, care, and good values. Because children are shaped not only by what parents mean, they are shaped by what repeated contact feels like in their body. That is why a child can say, "My parents love me," and still feel emotionally alone. Not because love is fake, because closeness feels conditional on being easy to handle. That is what so many children silently adapt to. Be easier, be calmer, be less messy. Say it better, feel it faster, need less. Explain yourself clearly. Do not make the room heavy. Do not be too much. And children who learn that often grow into very impressive performers. Polite, capable, funny, responsible, easy to praise. But inside, many of them are carrying a private exhaustion no one sees. The exhaustion of self-editing, the exhaustion of emotional management, the exhaustion of wondering which version of themselves is welcome in the family, and which version is too disruptive to bring into the light. This is why some children do not rebel loudly. They disappear quietly. And quiet disappearing is easy to miss. It looks like short answers, less eye contact, fewer spontaneous stories, a smile that arrives too quickly, a strange emotional flatness, a tendency to say, "It's fine," even when everything in their body says it is not fine. Parents often interpret that as maturity, distance, attitude, privacy, hormones, or just a phase. Sometimes it is, but very often it is something deeper. It is a child learning that being fully visible carries too much emotional friction. And here is what makes that so dangerous over time. Children who stop feeling emotionally safe at home do not stop having feelings. They simply relocate those feelings into friendships, into online spaces, into daydreams, into secrecy, into performance, into anxiety, into people-pleasing, into emotional shutdown, into anger, into a private inner life the parent can no longer reach directly. And when that happens, parents often panic. They say, "I don't know what happened. We used to be so close. They talk to everyone else, but not to me. I'm trying so hard, and somehow I'm getting less and less of the real them." That pain is real, but the answer is almost never to push harder. Because pressure is what created the need for protection in the first place. If your child is already filtering themselves around you, more emotional pressure usually does not create truth. It creates better camouflage. This is the moment where parenting has to become less about control and more about climate. Not climate in the political sense, climate GDK about you. What is the emotional weather around hard truths in this house? What happens when someone is ashamed here? What happens when someone is socially hurt? What happens when someone makes a mistake? What happens when a child is not impressive, not agreeable, not emotionally organized, not easy? Do they get steadiness, or do they get a storm? That question matters because children build their internal map of relationships from repeated emotional weather. If the weather is unpredictable, they become cautious. If the weather is shaming, they become secretive. If the weather is intrusive, they become guarded. If the weather is steady, they become more reachable. And this is why the strongest parents are often not the parents who say the smartest things. They are the parents whose presence feels least dangerous in difficult moments. Think about that. Not the most clever, not the most informed, not the most verbally skilled. The least dangerous. Dangerous does not only mean abusive. Dangerous can mean emotionally overwhelming. Dangerous can mean too intense. Dangerous can mean too reactive. Dangerous can mean too quick to interpret, fix, question, label, or personalize. Children do not need perfect parents. They need parents whose love does not become emotionally unsafe when things get hard. That is the real work. And yes, it is difficult. Because most parents are not only parenting their child, they are parenting through their own nervous system, their own childhood, their own fears, their own shame, their own beliefs about success, failure, respect, control, image, and what family is supposed to feel like. So when a child gets quiet, some parents do not just feel concern, they feel abandonment. When a teen wants privacy, they do not just feel curiosity, they feel rejection. When a child makes a mistake, they do not just see the mistake, they see the future rushing toward them in one terrifying flash. And that is why normal family moments can become emotionally oversized. The child spills milk. The parent reacts to disrespect from their own childhood. The teen pulls away. The parent reacts to old rejection. The child hides a bad day. The parent reacts to deep fear about failure, status, or safety. This is what makes parenting so psychologically intense. The child is living one moment. The adult may be living 3 timelines at once: the present, the future, and the unresolved past. And unless the adult learns to notice that, the child ends up carrying emotional weight that does not belong to them. That is why one of the most loving things a parent can do is become aware of their own escalation early. To notice, I am making this too big. I am interpreting too fast. I'm needing resolution on my timeline. I'm reacting to my fear more than to my child's actual state. I am about to turn a human moment into an emotional event my child will remember in their body. That pause is everything. Because when parents pause, they gain access to something much more useful than urgency. They gain choice. They can choose curiosity over interpretation, containment over intensity, guidance over control, dignity over domination. And dignity is one of the most underrated needs in a parent-child relationship. Children need food, shelter, safety, structure, and love. Yes, but they also need dignity. They need to feel that even when they are wrong, they are not ridiculous. Even when they are emotional, they are not too much. Even when they fail, they are not a disappointment as a person. Even when they are corrected, they are still being seen as human. Once dignity becomes unstable, many children stop learning from parents and start defending themselves from parents. That is when every conversation gets harder, because now the parent thinks, "Why is my child so defensive?" And the answer may be, because defense has become emotionally necessary here. This is what so many adults still carry from childhood. Not the rule itself, not even always the punishment, but the feeling of becoming small in front of someone whose love mattered deeply. That feeling stays. It becomes part of the body, part of the voice in the head, part of the way a person handles closeness for years. So if you want to change the future of your relationship with your child, and even the kind of relationships they one day build with other people, one of the most powerful things you can do is this. Separate correction from humiliation. Correct clearly. Hold boundaries. Use consequences. Be a parent. But do not make the child emotionally pay with dignity every time they struggle. That is what makes home safer. Now, this is the point where many people think, okay, but what if my child is actually rude, actually dishonest, actually manipulative, actually difficult? Then the answer is still not emotional chaos. Difficult behavior needs more leadership, not less. But leadership is not the same thing as emotional force. Emotional force says, I need to overpower this moment. Leadership says, I need to stay bigger than this moment without becoming cruel inside it. That difference changes everything, because children borrow regulation from adults for years before they can reliably create enough of it on their own. So when the adult becomes the least regulated person in the room, the lesson the child absorbs is not maturity, it is survival. But when the adult stays grounded while holding the line, the child learns something extraordinary. Conflict does not have to become rupture. Strong feelings do not require emotional destruction. Boundaries can exist without humiliation. Truth can be hard and still survivable. That is how real security is built. Not by removing all discomfort, by changing what discomfort feels like inside the relationship. And that is why repair matters so much. Repair is not a bonus skill. It is one of the central skills. Because every parent gets it wrong. Every good parent gets it wrong. You will say too much. You will react too fast. You will misunderstand the moment. You will bring your own fear into the room. You will sound harsher than you meant to. The real question is not whether you ever damage the moment. It is what happens after. If the parent becomes defensive, the child learns that parental power matters more than truth. If the parent repairs, the child learns that closeness can survive imperfection. Real repair sounds like this. I was trying to help, but I made you feel more alone. I got too focused on your behavior and missed what you were feeling. I pushed when I should have slowed down. I let my fear show up as pressure. We still need to talk about what happened. but I want to do it in a way that protects the relationship too. You did not deserve that tone. That kind of repair is not weakness. It is strength without ego armor. And children trust that. Not instantly, maybe. Not after one speech. But over time, deeply. Because now the child learns that your authority is not brittle. Your love is not conditional on being comfortable. Your boundaries are not powered by shame. Your presence can hold difficulty without making difficulty unbearable. That is rare, and it is life-changing. If this video has helped you put words to something you've been feeling in your own home, subscribe to the channel and share this with one person who genuinely cares about children, family, and the hidden psychology inside everyday conversations. Not because anyone needs one more parenting performance online, but because so many good parents are silently repeating patterns they never meant to pass on. Because once you see this clearly, you stop chasing the wrong target. You stop chasing perfect behavior as if that alone creates closeness. You stop chasing constant openness as if your child owes you access on demand. You stop chasing the fantasy that a good family has no distance, no shutdown, no awkwardness, no walls. Instead, you start building something deeper. A relationship where truth does not have to arrive perfectly to be welcome. A relationship where mistakes can be addressed without emotional exile. A relationship where a child can be corrected without feeling reduced. A relationship where strong feelings do not automatically become dangerous feelings. That is what changes families. Not perfection, not control, not one great lecture. Pattern. The pattern of a parent who slows down. The pattern of a face that feels safer. The pattern of a tone that does not instantly accuse. The pattern of boundaries with dignity. The pattern of curiosity before conclusion. The pattern of repair after rupture. The pattern of staying emotionally solid enough that your child does not have to spend so much energy protecting themselves from your reaction. And maybe that is the deepest truth of all. The goal is not to raise a child who tells you everything. The goal is to become the kind of parent your child does not have to feel alone around. Read that slowly in your mind. Not a parent who never gets angry. Not a parent who never says no. Not a parent who turns into a therapist instead of a leader. A parent whose presence does not make honesty feel emotionally expensive. Because when honesty stops feeling expensive, children begin to come back. Not always with grand confessions, sometimes with something much smaller, a more real answer, a less polished story, a tiny admission, a little more eye contact, a pause that does not end in shutdown, a moment where they risk being seen and do not regret it immediately. That is how trust returns, quietly, pattern by pattern, moment by moment, nervous system by nervous system. And once that process begins, the whole family changes. Not because the child becomes easier, but because home becomes less lonely. And that may be one of the greatest gifts any parent can give. Not perfection, not performance, not constant harmony, but a place where a child can stay human, even when they are struggling, and still feel that love has room for the truth.